Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Kawakami, and I'm here with Venkatesh Sivaraman. We're both PhD students in the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon. We're presenting our research, Why Do I Care What's Similar? Probing challenges in AI-assisted child welfare decision-making through worker-AI interface design concepts. And this work was conducted alongside a wonderful team of co-authors as shown here. Data-driven AI-based decision support tools, or ADS, are increasingly used to augment human decision-making in real-world domains, for example, in criminal justice or social work. These are contexts in which algorithms are augmenting human social decision-making, decisions that rely upon inferences and predictions about the intentions, behaviors, and beliefs of other people. Such contexts tend to invalidate assumptions made in less socially fraught decision settings. For example, these contexts require human decision makers to leverage nuanced, unstructured knowledge to inform their assessments. In the case of child maltreatment risk assessments, social workers operate on their understanding of qualitative unstructured allegations that's not captured by the ADS to make case-by-case holistic decisions. The data features made available to the ADS alone are not sufficient to inform workers' decisions. Human decision makers must also integrate subjective and potentially socially contested values into their decision processes. In online toxicity detection algorithms, the algorithm's ground truth notion of toxic may not align with each person's notion of toxicity. What looks like good toxicity labeling to one person might not align with the algorithm or another person's assessments. Social decision-making contexts also require that workers navigate irreducible degrees of uncertainty about people's future behavior. In recidivism risk assessments, judges must make decisions about people whose behavior and life circumstances are inherently unpredictable. Algorithms making predictions about risk of reoffense may also never have enough data features to accurately predict ground truth. As ADS get introduced to these domains, frontline workers are faced with new challenges to effectively incorporate risk scores into their nuanced socially fraught assessments about the future lives of real-world people. Yet we know little about how to design effective ADS interfaces to support human-AI partnerships in such social decision-making contexts. In this research, we explore how these complexities manifest themselves through a case study in the social work context. The Allegheny Family Screening Tool, or AFST, is an algorithmic decision support tool that has been deployed in Allegheny County since 2016. The AFST assists call screeners and supervisors screening decisions about potential child maltreatment cases. The AFST takes large amounts of government administrative data, as well as information gathered by call screeners to show workers a single risk score between 1 and 20 that's meant to capture the future risk of child maltreatment. We visited the call screeners and supervisors at their social work agency twice over the course of 2 weeks. Drawing on prior literature, along with workers' ideas and feedback from the first visit, we generated 10 design concepts that each redesigned or augmented the AFST in different ways. Using these design concepts, we probed workers' challenges and concerns around the AFST, along with their desires for new forms of worker-AI interactions and roles. Next, I'll pass it on to Venkatesh.
So I'll now give a quick overview of the design concepts we generated and some of our participants' reactions and reflections on them. We generated 10 design concepts, which are described in more detail in our paper, but for now we can consider these concepts as part of 4 broader design topics: discrepancies between human and AI decision-making processes, ways to enable dialogue between the worker and AI, communicating uncertainty, and measuring and providing feedback to workers on past decisions. Some of our design concepts were derived from past literature, such as works related to explainability and uncertainty, while others were generated based on observations and discussions we had from the first visit, which we then turned into sketches and showed them to participants in the second visit. For the first design topic, we wanted to experiment with providing workers more insight into the factors the AI uses, similar to feature explanation techniques. But in addition to those features that are provided by those techniques, we also wanted to surface factors that the ADS doesn't use and that workers might find relevant. Perhaps unsurprisingly, workers were fairly receptive to being able to see the factors that drive the score, and they mentioned wanting to see how those factors were specifically weighted as well. Notably, call screeners use the ADS after they've already assembled relevant information and formed an initial assessment, so the fact that these depictions highlight differences between the worker's assessment and their own ended up being crucial. This could allow them to use their knowledge of context to assess the relevance of each factor. Participants also noted that such interfaces might help mitigate bias in the data driving the AFST score. For example, for somebody who's getting public assistance compared to someone who makes over $100,000, they wanted to know how much weight in the score was based on income so they could counteract those potential sources of bias. The next design topic was based around an idea that surfaced many times during our first visit, which we then rendered into a visual representation. Workers told us that they often wanted to remove certain individuals or characteristics from affecting the score, such as parents who aren't in the picture or past issues that they knew were resolved. So in this design concept, we sought to give workers more control over the AFST score by allowing them to switch off features and see the adjusted score. Participants were almost uniformly excited about having this capability, particularly to remove information they believed was outdated or irrelevant to the current risk assessment. For example, one supervisor asked how they could balance out that father went to jail 10 years ago, but now father is out here being a productive citizen doing what it is that he needs to do. Based on where the AFST is pulling everything from, it's not pulling that father is now a productive citizen. So this interface could allow them to incorporate that knowledge to the family's credit. Workers were also quick, though, to note the risks of allowing arbitrary adjustments to the score, and some even felt that they weren't qualified enough to adjust the score in this way. So to mitigate this, some of them proposed the ability to write a justification for the modifications, so that supervisors could see both the raw score and how the worker had adjusted it. This highlights the benefits of aligning with accountability structures similar to the documentation that workers already write in the process of call screening. The third design topic had to do with communicating uncertainty. This is a feature that's often requested in interpretability studies with expert decision makers. So in addition to a simple probability curve design, we also experimented with showing uncertainty relating to how similar a case is to the cases observed in historical data. And if a case is very unusual due to specific data features, the interface would highlight that form of uncertainty to the call screener. These concepts were received with more mixed reactions than the previous two topics. For the simple probability curve, for instance, people found it confusing and mostly unhelpful, except to know how confident the ADS was in particularly difficult cases for them. On the other hand, uncertainty due to unusualness was perceived as being more useful because it highlighted an aspect of uncertainty that workers actually felt themselves, namely making decisions with missing data. For example, one worker described a child with significant behavioral health issues and substantial diagnoses, but the services were from another county, so that would have been missing data. And this was one that ultimately had to be screened in, even though it was a low-risk AFST score. The unusualness interface here could draw the worker's attention to this missing information and enable them to experience their own uncertainty appropriately. The final design topic examined workers' views on using historical data to inform future predictions, which is key to the use of statistical risk prediction in the first place. One visualization depicted the nearest neighbors of a case and provided statistics about the long-term outcomes of those cases. Another design concept was a more open-ended description of a possible way to evaluate call screeners' decision-making, similar to how the AFST itself was evaluated. So workers could then evaluate themselves on the basis of how aligned their decisions were to the outcomes. This topic also exhibited somewhat mixed reactions. Some participants were enthusiastic about the use of historical data to inform their decisions, and others maintained that every family is different. For example, one supervisor asked, "Why do I care what's similar? It's not this case. I don't care if your neighbor's case is kind of like yours. It doesn't relate to what's going on at your house." For these workers, this interface brought to light the core assumption of the ADS, which is to predict future outcomes on the basis of similar cases. But when it came down to it, they weren't comfortable with consciously making that assumption themselves. Workers were also interested in the possibility of receiving feedback on recent trends in their decision-making, but they stressed that the feedback should be aggregated and should only be used for self-improvement and maybe some lighthearted in-office competition, but not for oversight or performance evaluation. They also emphasized that the outcomes we described, which are shared with the AFST, were at a much longer time frame than the scales they operate on. So to really measure decision-making quality in an actionable way, we would need to incorporate outcomes over a variety of different timescales.
In the paper, we discussed 13 concept-specific implications, along with broader cross-cutting implications. I'll now preview a small subset of them. First, experiment with the technical feasibility of risk prediction tools that allow decision makers to interactively adjust feature values based on their knowledge of case-specific contextual factors. While prior literature discusses the trade-offs of providing such worker agency over the model, workers propose ways in which they could exercise control over model outputs while maintaining accountability for their actions. For example, by requiring open text explanations to be reviewed by their supervisors. Additionally, explore ways to directly involve workers in co-designing evaluation and performance measures that workers themselves find meaningful and relevant. For example, to counter their concerns about existing measures for decision-making that rely on assessing alignment of their decisions with the model's predictive target. Finally, workers express desires for reimagining the current model for statistical risk prediction to support their needs beyond their individual decision-making task. Workers suggested ways in which AI explanations could be leveraged to help them justify agreement or disagreement with the model to their peers. We'd like to acknowledge and thank folks at Allegheny County for their valuable input and commitment to transparency that shaped this research. And thank you so much for listening to our presentation.